Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 was a package of 5 separate bills passed by the U.S. Congress in September 1850, which diffused a 4-year political confrontation between slave and free states. Those 5 bills consist of: California would be admitted as a free state. The remainder of the Mexican cession will be divided into 2 separate territories, New Mexico and Utah. And these territories would decide by popular sovereignty whether to be slave-holding or free. Texas would cede its claim to parts of the New Mexico territory, and, in exchange, the government would cover Texas's $10 million war debt. The slave trade would be abolished in the District of Columbia, but slavery itself would continue. Lastly, Congress would straighten the Fugitive Slave Act by requiring citizens of any state, slave or free, to assist in the capture and return of runaway slaves. In the following image below, it displays a map. The map is very colorful, as you see. It has blue, tan, and pink. Each of these colors represent either a slave state, a free state, or a state that is open to slavery by the Compromise of 1850. A little more detailed. The pink represents the slave states, blue represents the free states and territories, and the tan color represents the states that were open to slavery by the Compromise of 1850.
In John C. Rawls' On the Brink of Civil War, The Compromise of 1850 and How It Changed the Course of American History, Rawls dramatically discussed what happened when a handful of senators in 19th century American history tried to hammer out a compromise to save the Union. He then explained how equal rights were wanted to be granted to the South in the new Western Territory. The importance of this book is that it informs individuals the history of the Compromise of 1850 and the other events that occurred during or around the time, such as the Civil War, the U.S.-Mexican War, and tension between the North and South. Henry Clay introduced the Compromise on January 29, 1850. The Compromise consisted of 6 separate bills that called for: 1. California to be admitted as a state without reference to slavery. 2. Territorial governments of the remaining portion of the Mexican addition to be organized without congressional restriction on slavery. Popular vote will resolve the question in the territory. 3. The boundary of the Texas would be resolved. 4. The depths of Texas would be assumed by the United States so long as Texas relinquished claims to any part of New Mexico. 5. Slavery would not be abolished in the District of Columbia without the consent of people of Maryland and those living in the District of Columbia, and without just compensation to slave owners. And 6. The slave trade would be abolished in the District of Columbia. Vermont legislators tried to notify a federal law they believed was immoral. The federal law required law enforcement officers and ordinary citizens to help capture runaway slaves. The compromise, however, also contained significant victories for slavery supporters. It stated that people could still be held as slaves in the District of Columbia. The district was under federal jurisdiction, so this represented the federal government authorizing slavery. The compromise also left unanswered the questions of whether Utah and New Mexico would eventually enter the Union as free or slave states. Vermonters found the most galling part of the compromise to be the strengthening of the Fugitive Slave Act, which required Vermont law enforcement officials to help capture people who had escaped slavery and return them to their masters. Officers were subject to hefty fines if they failed to cooperate. The law also compelled all good citizens, by which it meant everyone, to help capture runaways. Anyone caught sheltering or feeding a runaway could be subject to a large fine and jail time. The Compromise of 1850 was passed in a series of laws, the last being enacted in late September that year. For weeks, Americans braced for conflict, particularly over the Fugitive Slave Act, which politically observers expected some northern states would try to nullify. U.S. Senator Daniel Webster of Massachusetts, who had helped broker the compromise, spoke out against legislators of the North, which had a disinclination to perform fully their constitutional duties to help return runaway slaves.